Should you buy owner-occupier property first or should you go with rent vesting? As everybody is talking about rent vesting these days. But when you go with the rent vesting, you have to give up all the government incentives. For example, no stamp duty exemption, no first homeowner grant. Does the number really make sense when you're going rent vesting? We're gonna discuss all that in this video and it will help you understand the numbers behind buying your owner-occupier property first versus starting your journey with the rent vesting. Rent vesting has become very popular term these days. So basically rent vesting means you rent where you want to live and you invest where you can make most amount of money. Now in this example we're using a unit or villa valued at $770,000. Now the reason why we're using 770 because most people who are approaching us as first home buyers, they want to buy their first property or owner occupier, they all have very similar kind of budget and that budget is around 700 to 800,000. $700,000 to $800,000 budget in Sydney, don't go too far because the best thing you can buy with that budget is just a unit or maybe villa or maybe a townhouse. But there's no chance of buying a house. If you're buying in good suburbs in Melbourne, the same thing gonna happen. You probably won't be able to buy a house in Box Hill. Most likely you're gonna end up with buying a unit or villa. Now, if you look at the history, like 30-40 year history, this property type doesn't perform really well. They're growing at more around 3 to 4% in the long run, much less than a house. So house, the average is around 7%. So you're gonna get compromised growth when you're investing in a unit or villa. If you buy in some of the rarest or premium places, then you might get similar kind of growth as houses, but majority of the time, this asset type do struggle with getting more than 3 to 4% growth. Now, if you start with buying a unit or villa, you're gonna have compromised growth to start with. But at the same time, how the cash flow gonna look like? So let's look at the cash flow. So if you buy the $770,000 unit or villa, doesn't matter in Sydney or Melbourne. So if you pay 20% deposit, so 154,000, there's a stamp duty involved, and altogether you might have to spend $200,000 to buy this $770,000 unit. Now, if you don't have 20% deposit, you may have option to buy the same unit with 5% deposit or 10% deposit. So there's always ways to buy a property with lower deposit, but we are using 20% deposit in this example just to look at the cash flow. And we will also use 20% deposit when we do the numbers on investment, so to keeping the things equal. So now let's look at this example. So $200,000 to buy this property. What about the cash flow? So if we look at the council rates, water rates, body corporate, if you're buying unit or townhouse, there's going to be some body corporate. It can be more or less than this, but this is kind of average. There's going to be some maintenance. So if we work on 6.5% interest rate, if we work on interest only, this property gonna cost you $46,000 to hold for the whole year. $770,000 unit or villa where you pay 20% deposit, it's gonna cost you $46,000 for the whole year. Now, what if you were renting in the same place? So wherever you can buy this unit for 770, if you are renting in the same area, you most likely gonna pay $500 rent. And $500 rent means $26,000 for the whole year. So if you look at the difference here, one side you're paying $26,000 for the whole year, and on the other side, the mortgage you're paying $46,700. Now you might be thinking you own this property and this also going to have some growth. As I mentioned in the beginning, unit, villa or townhouses, historically they perform around 3 to 4%. 4% of 770 is around $30,000. So not a lot of growth, but cash flow difference between buying this property versus renting in the similar location is $20,000. Now, what if we take rent vesting route? What if we don't buy this property? So you're still living in the same area, your kids are still going to the same school, but now you're renting, you know, buying. Let's say we're buying in a different market where we can potentially buy a house with a bit of land and it is in the early stages of the cycle. That we can take advantage of the full growth cycle. Let's look at this example. It doesn't matter where we buy, as long as we're buying at the right time. So if we buy a property around $550,000, which is a house, so house historically have been growing at around 7%. So much better growth and the lower entry price here. So if we do the numbers on buying cost here, if you pay 20% deposit, so we're keeping the numbers same, 20% deposit in this case as well, stamp duty and all that. So our total cost to buy this property will be 134,000 if we pay 20% deposit. You can buy the same property with very less cash outlay, but let's keep the numbers same. For example's sake, $134,000 to buy this $550,000 property. Now let's look at the cash flow side of it. Now council rate plus water is 3,200, insurance around 1,500 altogether, maintenance 1,500. There's going to be some letting fee, there's going to be some property management fee, so altogether is 9,300. If you look at the bank side, the loan, so 6.5% interest only, again 80% LVR, so this property gonna cost us $38,000. Now this property gonna have some income, and if you look at the income side, if this property is renting at $560 a week with 1 week vacancy, this property gonna give us $28,500 income. Now there's income, there's expense, and there's some difference between both these numbers. Now we haven't included depreciation in these numbers, which can be added later to make the numbers even better, but let's work without depreciation. Difference between these two numbers is 9,400, so which means this property is negatively cash flowing by 9,400. Now this is before tax. Because this is an investment loss, so we can get some tax back on that. So if we are on 37% tax bracket, for example's sake, we will get around $3,000 back. Net negative cash flow will be around $6,000. Now the yearly rent, if you remember in the last example, was $26,000. So if you add up rent plus the negative cash flow from this property, we are all in $31,900. So even after paying the rent, even including negative cash flow from this property, we are still ahead by $14,000 when we compare our cash flow to an owner-occupier property. So now looking at this example, even after buying 2 investment properties in growth locations, you're still gonna be ahead on the cash flow side when you are rent vesting. Now some of you are gonna have questions like, what about the incentives? Because when you're buying an investment property, you don't get any first home buyer grant, or you don't get any stamp duty exemption. Yes, you have to give up incentives when you're buying an investment property first. You won't get any stamp duty exemption. There most likely not gonna be any grant available. I always ask my client to put a number on these incentives. So if you are someone who buying in, for example, let's say you're buying in Sydney. In Sydney, there is no stamp duty up to $800,000 property value, and there is possibly $10,000 grant available. So if you are someone who looking to buy a unit or villa under $800,000, first of all, you're buying an asset that don't have that much growth potential, because as I said, historically this asset type has underperformed. You will get that $30,000 incentive in the form of stamp duty exemption. If $10,000 first home grant, that is $40,000 worth of incentives. But that $40,000 worth of incentives is nothing if you buy a property which is not going to grow in value. At the same time, if you buy the property in a growth market and you buy at the bottom of the cycle, the same property can do anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 in next couple of years. And then $40,000 incentive is nothing compared to what you can get by investing in the right areas. As you saw in the video, government incentives are pretty much like distraction in your way to buy a high growth property. Whenever we try to fit something in those incentives, we end up buying a property that's gonna underperform in the long run, and we're gonna lose much more money by trying to chase that incentive. But there are some scenarios when these incentives can work out really well in your overall strategy. So if you are someone who looking to build a property portfolio but you don't know where to start, you need someone to help you build a strategy, reach out to me or my team and we'll help you plan how to build your property portfolio.